So I'm really delighted to introduce our next speaker. This is Elin half Davies, who we actually heard from a little bit earlier. So we got hopefully a little taster of what your talk is going to be about. Um, she will be delivering a keynote address introducing disruptive technologies, lessons from a passionate entrepreneur. I'm really looking forward to this. Welcome, Elin.
So thank you so much for the opportunity to join you today, particularly to the organisers for giving me this platform to share what's essentially a very personal experience as a founder of a medtech company. And I want to sort of emphasize that the sort of words I convey are very much my personal opinion of the journey of founding Aparito, and of course not related to any opinion of Eli Lilly, which is now my new employer. So as mentioned, not getting the earlier, I founded Aparito 10 years ago, and we are essentially a medtech company. As you've probably gathered from my name, I'm Welsh, and we founded the company in Wrexham in North Wales. And it was very much based on my personal and professional experience, which I'll go into later. And it turned out to be an epic 10-year journey from founding a company based on my experience to being acquired by Eli Lilly back in May of this year. And the title that I was given was The Lessons from a Passionate Entrepreneur. I have sort of modified it slightly and decided to give 10 reflections from 10 years of Aparito, mainly because I felt that lessons from me to this audience was probably slightly misplaced, but also just an opportunity for me to reflect on what the last decade has entailed. So just to maybe set the scene, because I think it's really important in the context of what we've heard over and over today around successful entrepreneurs going on to find their second, third, fourth, fifth company, and how using your network to build a successful company is really important. So I'm a farmer's daughter from Wales, and my life ambition as a child was to follow my mum's career choice to be a children's nurse. And I moved down to be a children's nurse at Great Ormond Street Hospital, where I worked for 12 years, and never ever imagined that I would ever leave clinical nursing. But through part serendipity and other opportunities, I had the opportunity to support children and their families who are living with life-limiting, life-threatening illnesses through pharmaceutical-funded clinical trials. And as you imagine, these were the children and their families' last resort. There were no other therapeutic options available to them. And therefore, the sense of desperation and hope that this clinical trial was going to save their child was something that stays with you forever. And it was, I alluded to it in my previous Q&A panel. It was at that time that children and families started asking me, why are we using this endpoint when it has no reflection of what's important to us on a day-to-day basis in our quality of life? And also, at the end of clinical trials, ended up with inconclusive results because the data was so messy. So I think you can all appreciate the devastation when a clinical trial fails to demonstrate efficacy. But when the data is so noisy because the patients were not able to comply with the study assessment, it's even more heartbreaking. And when there is doubt of whether it was the drug that failed or the choice of primary endpoint that failed, it's even worse. So based on that experience, I went on to do my PhD at UCL, and then decided naively that I could influence better clinical trial designs by working as a regulator. So moved to work at the European Medicine Agency to implement the pediatric regulation, and worked there for 6 years across orphan and pediatrics. So while Aparito might be only 10 years old, the sort of experience that went to it is sort of more than like 25 years old. I'm not sure why the clicker's not working for me. So I'm just sharing this article that was in Forbes. It's over 6 years old. I think it's a fascinating headline. I did not pick the headline, of course, But what I was illustrating here and the focus of the interview was around, could we design better clinical trial through digitized endpoints such as digital biomarkers and electronic clinical outcomes assessment. And I sort of read this article kind of in reflection of looking back more than 6 years. And at least the focus was, it reminded me very much of why I founded Aparito. And it was allow patient data to be captured more accurately, improving the success of clinical trial testing and the quality of patients' life by allowing them to take part in clinical trials in their own home. So I'm now going to go on just in a bit of a tongue-in-cheek reflection of the 10 lessons or 10 reflections that I had in my experience as founding Aparito. I don't know why the clicker doesn't seem to be working for me, but okay. Yeah. So lesson number 1, timing is everything. So for us, we had Atom 5, which is our software platform, our eco platform. We obviously had our team, and we were then waiting for the perfect opportunity to sell. In this instance, the Atom 5 platform and the Aparito team were actually what we call BC. We were before COVID. So it allowed us to work on our roadmap for the platform, get the right team in place. And so when the COVID wave came, we were well prepped or well placed with a platform that we knew worked, a platform that had multiple iterations of patient experience and site feedback. And by that time, we also had the right team that were able to move quickly in terms of the Aparito processes that we'd put in place, but also the way to support clinical trials. And so we like to think that the timing of catching that wave with the right board and the right team helped us immensely. My second sort of lesson is that luck plays a part. Or is it? We're all familiar with the labouring under correct knowledge. And I have to say that over the last 10 years, we have worked incredibly hard. But it was actually very much around knowing what to work on and what not to work on. And I think that sort of keeping in mind that actually you can work incredibly hard and not always have the right luck is something to not be too disheartened for. Prior to founding Aparito, I had also rowed across the Atlantic, and it had been an adventure that I'd taken on board with my fellow nurse, Herdip Sidhu, to row 2,700 miles from La Gomera to raise money for children living with inherited metabolic disorders. And the funds raised went to look at the development of B6 for neonatal seizures. Herdip and I spent 77 days, 7 hours and 37 minutes rowing across the Atlantic. And at that time of sleep deprivation and acute pain, I can honestly say that we felt that there were times that we could not go on. In hindsight, my row across the Atlantic was actually very similar, and indeed gave me many lessons that would contribute to building a medtech company. And most notably is that in the sleep deprivation and in the moments that you think that everything's going against you, all you can do is get up and not focus on the 2-hour rowing shift that you have or the day ahead or the miles that you've got left, but literally just to pull on the oars one stroke at a time. And that's really what we applied to in Aparito. There were so many fires to burn and put out that actually we could only break it down into small steps and pull on the oars one stroke at a time. Number 4 was to keep your North Star. For me, to go from a experience of nursing, academia, regulatory as a very civil servant mindset, it was a massive culture shock to go into the entrepreneurship startup world. And it felt that I was being pulled from pillar to post, and often having conversation that just didn't feel right or didn't feel comfortable in some of the decisions that we had to make Aparito financially viable. And much like sort of sailing into the wind, which means you sometimes ground into a halt, it was really important that we kind of kept our North Star, which was doing the right thing by patients, but sometimes knowing that you had to sail away from the wind in order to get to that direction. And we kind of buffered ourselves into how far we were willing to go on all of the decisions. And I mentioned it in my previous panel that while we were a B2C company, our main users were patients and site staff, and therefore we always reinvested everything back into getting patient feedback and site feedback, and not necessarily investing it in sales and marketing and other more commonly kind of accepted ways of building a company. Number five, people make or break you, and the importance of finding your tribe. There's obviously a lot of books around the importance of hiring the right talent. In the first 5 years of Aparito, we were based in Wrexham in North Wales, and this was Wrexham in the days before Hollywood stars Ryan Reynolds and Rock McKenney. So I like to say that we picked Wrexham first and that they followed. But in reality, it actually made it a really hard place to build a world-class tech team that had the data science and the techies and the investments available for Wrexham. And in that first 5 years, I think I was just so relieved and excited that anybody would want to work for me in Aparito that I forgot to do some of the basic HR interviewing and sanity check. And it took probably until the second half of Aparito's decade to make sure that we were recruiting the right people that fitted within a startup mentality. The contrast between going from a massive corporate where everybody wants to talk about strategy but nobody wants to be able to talk about strategy and roll up their sleeves and do the coding and clean the toilets when required is quite a difficult one in a small company. I also want to focus just how important getting the right clients is. Obviously we were building Aparito organically because investment didn't really come our way, and I'll go on to talk about that in a bit. But not all clients and not all money counts equally. And the difference when we had a client that just worked incredibly well with is in terms of having the right appetite for innovation. They wanted to do something differently in their clinical trials. They were quick to make a decision, and they were sort of accepting that there were risks involved, that they just made such a difference to our working life that it was more than just signing the contract in order to get the revenue to pay the bills and to pay the salaries. And also, we absolutely relished in our academic and patient group partnership. So I want to give a big shout out to all the patient groups that partnered with us to be part of our patient group accelerators and taught us so much, but also kept us to our North Star of why we were doing this. But also to our academic partnership, two in particular. We had DZNE in Germany, who had a very long-term balanced view on contract negotiation for such technology to be used in their clinical areas of neurodegenerative disorders, and also University of Birmingham, who enabled us to really be iterative and launch new features in a slightly safer way than in IMP studies. And then, of course, investors. We did, as I say, have some high net worth individuals that invested us and some institutional investors, and getting that relationship right was absolutely crucial. I think AJ mentioned people essentially work with people, and it's getting the right people that fits within your vision and your tribe that really is important. Cash is king, but really, I think it's a bit of a poor ruler. And I'm mindful that this might be a sort of controversial aspect. But I think it was, as a reminder, we were medtech, so we didn't fit into the bio investment fund, and we didn't fit in the tech investment world. So the techies didn't get the regulation world of pharma, and the sort of investors that were more traditionally used to investing in assets didn't sort of necessarily get the aspect. So I went through hundreds and hundreds of meetings with investors as a female founder who'd never been in industry, who hadn't exited, who didn't have the sort of experience to sort of convince any investors that I would be a good bet on. And you know, it's hard to convey now that it really felt like a death by 1,000 paper cuts when you get all those no's. But in some ways, it just sort of made me more committed that I would go on to build Aparito in my own way. We obviously had other companies like Science 37, Medable that were announcing a lot of investment rounds, and that made it quite dispirited for our team and us to go against those in sort of RFP of winning business. But we kept going in our own way and created our own different path. And most importantly, we were invested initially by Bethnal Green Ventures. So they were a social impact fund, so very different. And then later, Development Bank of Wales came along. And they stayed true with us throughout the journey, reinvested on multiple times. And that was fantastic because everybody kept saying, oh, you know, ask your friends and family to invest in you. And I was saying, my friends and family are farmers and nurses. They don't have the sort of funds to invest in this sort of companies. And so Bethnal Green Ventures and Development Bank of Wales really did make a difference to us. And I was pleased that we were able to give BGV more than a 10-time return on their investment. When you don't have the cash, then time is your greatest asset and you have to use it wisely. And that includes saying no. And again, in hindsight, I wish I'd said a few more no's along the time, but you're kind of trying to make sure that you don't miss out on any opportunity. And I think in reflection, I probably would have stopped chasing investors' funds and focused more on building the company through revenue and growth as a way that possibly would have worked out better for me. And again, I'm mindful that telling this audience that unicorns don't really exist is a bit like telling primary school children that Father Christmas doesn't exist. Of course, I do appreciate that unicorns are out there, but I would really like to promote the sort of concept that we develop zebra-based companies. So those that are, you know, growing profitably with a sort of growth strategy that has social and ethical obligations at its heart. And maybe we can promote more of zebra-type companies as opposed to unicorn-type companies. Number 8, take calculated risks. So as mentioned, I had rowed across the Atlantic and then gone on to row across the Indian Ocean too. So I guess my appetite for risk is higher than your average person. But I took part recently in a piece of research by Coulter Partners. And if there are any digital health CEOs and founders out there, I highly recommend that you can contact Coulter Partners to take part in the research. But they recently announced the results from their first 50 qualitative interviews that assess the personality traits of digital health CEOs and founders. And you'll notice that the findings were that we were significantly different, particularly that we were innovative, autonomous, disruptive, but actually daring and predictable, and not a natural team builder. So I guess as investors, being aware that these are the personality traits of your companies that you're investing in is again going to be helpful for you to understand what motivates them and what drives them as they grow their company forwards. My reflection number 9 is pressure is a privilege, and obviously this is the amazing Billie Jean King, who was ahead of a time in breaking glass ceilings and changing different sort of settings for women. And I, think that while sport for women is being changed consistently, women that actually take part in sport are actually also being given the resilience and the tools to go out in the corporate world. But I have to admit that at the time, the daily pressures of building Aparito didn't necessarily feel as a privilege. But now looking back, I can appreciate it. So you'll be pleased to know it's my 10th and final lesson slash reflection is that it's so important to enjoy the journey and not the destination. When I set off from La Gomera, the destination was Antigua, a beautiful, lovely Caribbean island. And I think it's fair to say that anybody would be very excited about the destination of Antigua. But in reality, it wasn't just a straight line journey there. And in many of the storms that we had, we were pushed back in sort of, in 4 hours, what had previously taken us 36 hours to row. And it is very much like building a company. You sometimes feel you're going down a wave at epic speed, and then all of a sudden the weather turns and you're being blown backwards faster than you can pull your oars in. And the trip certainly lasted far longer. We'd anticipated that the Atlantic row would take 60 to 70 days. It actually took 77 days. And I think if we had just focused incessantly on being in Antigua, the journey would have been hell. And so we had to value and relish and enjoy the experience of being out there on the open ocean, and enjoy very much the distinction of being alone versus being lonely. And I think that's really critical when founders go on the point of building their company. They have to enjoy the day-to-day challenges of what they're doing and not build towards an exit. When I first heard the question, what's your exit strategy? Again, to demonstrate my naivety, I didn't know what that meant. I was like, well, my plan is, my goal is to make sure that a digital biomarker and an eco that I've been developed gets utilized to license a drug by the FDA. That was my goal. That was my mission. There was nothing in it around exit. And as we were approaching the elections recently, and there was the big hoo-ha around capital gains tax, and what a detrimental impact it would have on the British economy with all the entrepreneurs leaving. And I kind of thought, if that's really their only motive to start a company, I'm not sure that's a motive that's going to keep the right companies in the UK. But I guess that's more of a philosophical, political question than we want to get to today. And of course, in reality, I never knew that Lily was going to be my destination. After COVID, we had been approached by a lot of potential suitors looking for acquisitions, and I guess none of them quite felt right. And I know as a regulator, a scientist, I was very data-driven, but I also went a lot by my gut feeling. So when Lily came along, it actually felt that they had the right mission and vision for the patient experience of clinical trials, which I bought into. And I'm now really excited and looking forward to scaling Atom 5 to support both Lilly studies and to continue on the mission to support non-Lilly studies. So thank you for indulging me in this reflection. I appreciate it. Thank you.